Welcome to High Cheese with Darren Maloney. Today is Monday, March 7th, 2022. Well, it looks like the ball is in President Zelensky's court. Reuters is reporting this morning that Russia has told Ukraine it is ready to halt military operations in a moment if Kiev meets a list of conditions, a Kremlin spokesman said Monday. Moscow was demanding that Ukraine cease military action, change its constitution to enshrine neutrality, acknowledge Crimea as Russian territory, and recognize the separatist Republic of Donetsk and Lugansk as independent states. And let me just go over what these items are. And these are the original items that Putin wanted in the first place. These were ignored by Zelensky, and this is what caused Russia to go in. So what Russia wanted, and when they're talking about enshrining neutrality, is that Russia wants a commitment from Ukraine that it would never join NATO. And Russia views Ukraine as a buffer zone between NATO and them. And to have Ukraine become part of NATO, you're putting a massive amount of firepower right on the Russian border. Because what's going to happen, NATO's just going to push their own troops there and put their own weaponry right on the border of Ukraine and Russia. Now, the other item is he wants Ukraine to acknowledge Crimea, and Crimea was annexed by Russia in 2014. And they want to recognize the separatist republics of Donetsk and Lugansk, which is in the eastern part of Ukraine, as independent states. And remember, about a week going up into this war, that the Russian Duma passed a resolution recognizing these two republics as independent states. So that's what they want. This was, again, Ukraine denied this, and they went to war. And it's a tough situation that Zelensky's in, because Ukraine's going to lose. Ukraine is going to get pummeled. And you think of the two choices that Zelensky has. One, and both choices do not help his people. One is to continue fighting as is, and they will get pummeled. A lot of Ukrainians will get killed. The other alternate is try to get NATO and the West involved in this war. Well, if you get NATO and the West involved in this war, you have World War III playing out in Ukraine, which is not good for your people. So anyway, that you look at it, this is not a good situation for Zelensky. He clearly could help himself by taking a hard look at this. Now, the problem is that you've got the West and the globalists. They don't want this. They want continued war. They want Russia hobbled or destroyed. And let me just give you and it's funny how you can't make this up. And this is the headline from yahoo.com. On the same coverage of what I just spoke about, the headline on this, it says, Russia reveals harsh demands for ending the war as talks begin. And it goes on as, how harsh this is. This is really harsh. This is terrible. Well, don't forget, Zelensky, your people are dying. So think hard about this. What's best for your country? It's a bad situation that you're in. It's very bad. You got Putin. And he's brutal. And he's going to be brutal to your people. And the globalists want this to go on and on and on. And they keep on. And another reason I feel sorry for Zelensky is he keeps on being led by the West. They kept on leading him on by promising him NATO, promising him membership in the EU. And he said, yeah, okay. But they led you on. And now they're leading you on right now with this support. Zelensky is asking for a no-fly zone, but he doesn't realize what he's asking for is World War III in Ukraine. That's not helpful. And he's asking for military assistance. Does your army know how to use the weapons that they're going to give you? You really have to stay back, take a step back. It's a bad situation, and your choices are not good, but you have to make a choice at this point. And again, let me get back to the West And let me get back to how the globalists want this war to continue or get worse. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of clips from Meet the Press on yesterday. And Chuck Todd is just pushing and pushing for this no-fly zone, which again, World War III. So let me go to a couple of clips, and what I'm going to do, they'll just be, a rapid-fire clips of him asking nearly every person he interviews, well, what about the no-fly zone? Can't we do the no-fly zone? Let's go to clip and we'll discuss.
All right, I want to talk about the no-fly zone. Let me quote President Zelensky on Telegram on Friday. Why rule out the no-fly zone? Would you support a no-fly zone? You sound like somebody then that would be in favor of a no-fly zone over Ukraine right now? Is that how you, if Putin is what you describe him as, what guardrails should we be putting on the NATO alliance right now? Admiral, I want you to listen to Kira Ruddick. She's a Ukrainian member of parliament, and this was her plea when it came to the no-fly zone. Take a listen.
We all know that also the next step that we see is a no-fly zone over Ukraine. And I know that everybody is saying, no, 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 the Third World War will start. I will be very blunt with you. It has already started.
All right, we have the map up. Logistically, how doable is this? And why are so many folks in the United States adamant about not even attempting it?
Well, the reason no one wants to attempt it is because a nuclear war will result. And by the way, I just wanted to make a comment on that elected official that was commenting on a no-fly zone. You know, I understand that from her perspective, you got Ukrainians dying, and that's really bad. And to her, there's no difference between what's going on now and World War III. Ukrainians are getting killed. And to her, let's take the chance of the rest of the world going nuke because I need to save my Ukrainian people. So I'm not quite sure she realizes what this no-fly zone means. But nevertheless, let's get back to Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd is pushing for this, is pushing for this, is pushing for this. Because his masters want him to push for this. And what they're doing is, it's an old trick that the media plays. They're searching for a hook. They're searching for somebody to say yes or maybe. And then they can always go back and say, oh, look, this person said it. Or this important person came out and said, oh, yeah, let's look into it. And then it grows. And what they do is they go interviewing all the other powerful people. And they hope they can build momentum for a third world war. So you see Chuck Todd got his marching orders here. And let me just go back to a clip which wraps everything up about what Todd is doing. So let's go back to that clip, and then we'll come back and discuss.
Let's look back at the Balkans. I think if we look back in history, we had similar kind of situations, differences, but similar in the 1990s.
We were never going to go in, though. And eventually we went in. I mean, I was just going to say, I've been thinking about that a lot. We said we weren't going to go in. I remember all of those pledges.
Yeah.
And we couldn't stand watching this humanitarian crisis.
And that is Chuck Todd's game plan here. He's going to use the old Balkan situation where everyone said they weren't going to go into the Balkans, and eventually they did. And Todd is going to use his position in the press, in the media, to push and push and push a no-fly zone or anything that will get our involvement in Ukraine because they want chaos. If they can't beat Putin, they want chaos. And this tells me they know they can't beat Putin. And I'm not rooting for Putin, but they can't beat him. And at the same time, I don't want chaos because chaos means your kid's going into battle, your kid's getting nuked, and that's the reality of it. But these guys don't care. Guys like Chuck Todd, everybody else that's on Meet the Press. Oh, and by the way, the person that he was interviewing there at that point was the former NATO commander, James Stavridis. And that's the dangerous thing here. This is all manipulation. This is what the media has been doing for years and years and years. They did it with the Iraqi war. They did it with Donald Trump. And they're doing it here. Now, speaking of James Stavridis. I want to go back to that interview. I'm going to just play a clip of him in the same episode of Meet the Press. So let me play this clip, and then we'll get back.
What we ought to do is give the Ukrainians the ability to create a no-fly zone, more Stingers, more missiles that can go higher than Stingers, and above all, consummate this fighter deal, get those MiG-29s in their hands.
Well, thank you, James Stavridis, for your insight. I'm sure you had the United States' interest at heart. I don't know. I don't think so. Now, Stavridis is the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. And you know where he's working now? He's working for the Carlyle Group. The Carlyle Group, I think, is the largest private equity firm in the world. And they're one of the largest investors in defense. So I don't even know why this guy is even on the show, because he's got an ethical problem here. Take a look at what he's saying. He says we need to spend more money on the military in Ukraine. And that's clearly going to help the companies where the Carlyle Group invested. That's not an ethical issue? And why didn't NBC say something about this? You know, I think if you watch CNBC and these other finance shows, they come out now and they say whether these talking heads have any positions in the stocks they're talking about. Well, why don't they do that here? Why didn't they tell the world that, hey, look, this guy works for a defense investor? They don't want you to know that. They want you to buy more military equipment. They want to send your kids to fight in Ukraine. No skin off of their back. Interesting. It says here, ex-NATO commander, Putin may be the best thing that ever happened to the alliance. And it says a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander said Sunday that Russian President Putin might be the best thing that ever happened to the military alliance. James Stavridis, NATO commander from 2009 to 13, told MSNBC that Putin's unprovoked attack on Ukraine has resulted in alliance members stepping up as never before. And it also helps your investments too. So, in my previous, I think it was my first episode, I mentioned that these generals have sold this country out. Many of them, not all of them. Many of them. And they spit on the grave of Dwight Eisenhower when they do this, because Eisenhower warned us of the military-industrial complex. And I have a feeling that this Stavridis is an extension of that. They don't have your kids' interests. They don't have my interests. They have their own interests. And unfortunately, Putin's a bad guy, but they cannot live with him. And as I said before, they will create chaos. And if they can make money off the chaos, which is what they want, they'll do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to switch it to a general that has a differing opinion on Ukraine. So let me play it, and then we'll get back. This was a general. He was interviewed on Fox News, I think Fox Business. And it's a different opinion of what we're hearing from the mainstream media, from Fox and MSNBC and everyone else. So let me play this. And it's a little sobering, but it's the reality, I think, of what's going on in Ukraine. So let me play this, and then we'll get back.
Russian forces, I think, frankly, were too gentle. They've now corrected that. So I would say another 10 days, this should be completely over. But the question is, what is it that Zelensky is going to do? The Russians have made it very clear what they want is a neutral Ukraine. This could have ended days ago if he accepted that. And then they can adjust the borders. But the eastern part of Ukraine is firmly in Russian hands. But again, the Russians are not seizing territory. They're destroying Ukrainian forces. That's their focus.
Colonel, it sounds like you don't approve of Zelensky's stand.
Oh, I think Zelensky is a puppet. And he is putting huge numbers of his own population at unnecessary risk. And quite frankly, most of what comes out of Ukraine is debunked as lies within 24 to 48 hours. The notions of taking and retaking airfields, all of this is nonsense. It hasn't happened.
Is not a hero? when he's standing up for himself and his own people? You don't think he's a hero?
No, I do not. I don't see anything heroic about the man. And I think the most heroic thing that he can do right now is to come to terms with reality. Neutralize Ukraine. This is not a bad thing. A neutral Ukraine would be good for us as well as for Russia. It would create the buffer that, frankly, both sides want. But he's, I think, being told to hang on and try to drag this out, which is tragic for the people that have to live through this.
Colonel Douglas McGregor, thanks for being with us, sir. We'll see you again soon.
And that was Colonel Douglas McGregor. I think I referenced him as a general. But nevertheless, I don't think he's going to be asked back to Fox. And look, he's got a sobering point. You know, Zelensky's got a tough decision to make. He's getting pounded by Putin. He's getting strung along by the West. And there's really no good option for him. And he's got to choose between two bad decisions. I'm sorry, that's life. A lot of times people have to make those kind of decisions. But you're the president of Ukraine. You have to make that decision. And as I said before, you can either string this along and get more people killed, or you can declare neutrality. It's tough, but in order to save your people, you should do that. And I don't know why you're pushing for a no-fly zone, because it will cause you World War III. Unless you're being spiteful. So if you suffer, everybody else has to suffer? Well, I don't admire that. All right, let's take a break. We'll get back. Okay, let's talk about the Biden administration as it continues to flail away and really not accomplishing anything. Gasoline prices are now over $4 per gallon. We've got U.S. representatives flying to Venezuela with Moderna, trying to get him to pump more gas. Remember him, our arch enemy, the communist? Who are now reaching out to our enemies and asking them to pump more gas, but not at home. I hear they're looking to fast track the Iran deal so they can get more Iranian oil on the market. But it's just the continued failure of this administration at every point in everything. Everything. Now, I was looking at some of the press conference today, and Jen Psaki, she was trying to put the blame on Putin for the high gas prices. And just be prepared. That's going to be their answer for inflation. They're going to hope you're going to forget, and they're going to hope that when inflation continues to stay high, they'll just blame it on Russia. But what they won't blame is their policy on domestic oil. And whether they put sanctions on Russia or not, the United States should still start pumping oil again. Open those leases up. And again, in my last episode, I'm not sure that the drillers even want to drill, because they don't want to expend all that money. And then 6 months later, when this whole issue is gone, federal government comes back and says, no, you can't drill anymore. Well, they don't want that situation. And that's where you want a president that is a businessman. They understand business. They understand that they're not going to jerk anybody around like Biden would do, because he's a career politician and he's part of the swamp. So my point is that Russia gas and no Russia gas, we still should start pumping here more. And we should see if we can open up the pipeline again. Again, my last episode, I said I'm not sure if Canada wants to open up the Keystone Pipeline. Who knows? But it's everything accumulating here that is resulting in this $4 plus. One night it went 50 cents around me. One night, overnight, went 50 cents. And then went up another 20 cents per gallon last night. So I'm looking at 430 here in New Jersey. I'm sure it's higher in the West Coast. I'm sure it's pushing $7, $8 on the West Coast. But this administration is incapable of doing anything. Just incapable. You know, they can't. They're talking about a deal with Poland. Poland is supposed to send their MiGs over to Ukraine and let Ukraine use them, and then we're supposed to replenish Poland with F-16 fighters. Well, they've been talking about that for 2 or 3 days, and they've led everyone to believe that it's happened. I just heard Poland's like, well, wait a second, hold on here. It's not a done deal. And I can understand why. They want to know the details. How are these planes getting to Ukraine? How are these MiGs that are in Poland right now going to get to Ukraine? And how are they going to be maintained? And who's going to train them? The Ukrainian fighters? And this is where the Biden administration is completely inept. They don't understand that. They absolutely don't understand that. And they don't understand that the answers to the world today are found on the granular level. Not on spreadsheets, not on meetings with 20 people talking about things that have no positive effect on you and me. All right, I want to switch to Bill Barr. Now, Bill Barr's doing this because his grandson or somebody must need to get into law school, because he's got to go back and reach into his swampy friends and swampy connections to get something. Because why did he write this book? And why did he do this interview? And this is another reason why when Trump gets back into office, I think he should pull all the top advisors, positions like the Attorney General, pull them out of some in the Midwest. Get some local guy, some local prosecutor, and put him in that position, and surround him with other local prosecutors from all over the people with no connection to Washington. And then you know what you have when you have that the swampy people that are still in Washington and still in your bureaucracy. Move them over, give them an office to sit in, give them a cubicle, and give them a crossword puzzles to use for the 4 years. Washington has to be broken up. Disperse Washington throughout the country. Instead of having all these federal buildings, move them to Idaho. Move some to Missouri. Because the problem is you've got all this power concentrated in this one area. And they socialize with each other. They scratch each other's back. Well, you can't do that when you have one department in Iowa, another department in Florida. And you get to keep the politicians away from them, too. But as usual, I'm glad Trump stuck up for himself. And you got to love Trump. He writes a letter to Lester Holt, who did the interview with Bill Barr, and set things straight. And this is what I love about Trump. There's no quarter with him. He will defend himself anywhere, on every level. And that's the attitude we want for somebody who's president. Well, the swampy rhinos have met in Sea Island, Georgia. And let me read an article here. It says here, conservative think tank's exclusive gathering will include Biden official, but not Donald Trump. And it says a private, off-the-record gathering of conservative leaders and wealthy donors will convene this week in Sea Island, Georgia, with appearances by a White House official and several critics of former President Donald Trump. Trump was not invited to the exclusive event, which will be attended by some of the Republican Party's biggest donors, according to 2 people familiar with the event who were not authorized to discuss it. So that's BS. There aren't big donors there. They're a group of swampy Republicans. But I'll be surprised at any big donors there. It says here, the Conservative American Enterprise Institute's annual World Forum this year will be held at the Cloister, a high-end hotel complex in Sea Island, and feature invite-only discussions, meals, and access to miles of private beach. The schedule for this year's forum was obtained by CBS News. The Center for Public Integrity, a nonprofit watchdog that focuses on corruption and abuses of power, have described the gathering as a secretive event where industry titans and GOP megadonors mingle with mostly Republican power players and an exclusive off-the-record retreat. Now, this is all BS. And guess who's going to speak? One of the key speakers in this week's gathering will be Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who's been working hard behind the scenes to recruit candidates who come from a more traditional Republican mold. Do you really think we want to go back to you? Do you really think we want to go back to that kind of traditional Republican mode? Those people that have been screwing us for the past 40 or 50 years? I mean, you've done all right, Mitch. But how about the rest of America? Also, Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, who Trump had harshly criticized for refusing to endorse his efforts to decertify President Joe Biden's 2020 win in the state, will also speak at the forum. McConnell repeatedly attempted to recruit Ducey to jump into Arizona's Senate race, but the governor decided to do so. Instead of celebrating Trump like the Conservative Political Action Conference in Orlando did last month, this year's American Enterprise Institute's World Forum will feature Democrats alongside congressional Republican officials and possible contenders for the party's 2024 presidential nomination. So they're trying to reconstitute the swamp here. That's what they're trying to do. Good luck with that. So just remember, if you're watching a TV show and you see one of these talking heads from the American Enterprise Institute, just remember that they're no longer Trump's friend. And they'll try to spin it, oh, we're a conservative group, and this and that, and this and that. But just remember, whatever you hear from these people is essentially they're trying to stick a dagger into Trump. So they'll try to become more prevalent over the next few years. But just be on the lookout for them. It's the American Enterprise Institute. Okay, let's look at a couple of tidbits before we go into business and finance. The first one I want to look at is, looky here. It says here, health officials relied too heavily on vaccines as a cure-all, the CDC director says. Let me read a little bit of this. It says Dr. Rochelle Walensky, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, admitted health officials relied too heavily on vaccines as a cure-all of sorts for COVID, and said vaccine makers didn't warn the agency that the vaccines would be less effective against potential variants. Dr. Rochelle Walensky, director of the CDC, became the latest prominent official to contradict key aspects of the official COVID-19 narrative of the past 2 years. In a March 3rd appearance at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri, Walensky was interviewed by Dr. William Powderly, co-director of the institution's Division of Infectious Diseases. During the interview, Walensky said she learned COVID vaccines were effective from watching CNN. She also admitted health officials relied too heavily on vaccines as a cure-all of sorts for COVID, and said vaccine makers didn't warn the agency that the vaccines would be less effective against potential variants. She also admitted that the science, far from being settled, is gray instead of black and white. Walensky said, I can tell you where I was when the CNN feed came that it was 95% effective, the vaccine. So many of us wanted to be hopeful. So many of us wanted to say, okay, this is our ticket out, right? Now we're done. So I think we had perhaps too little caution and too much optimism for some good things that came our way. I really do. I think all of us wanted this to be done. Nobody said waning when you know, oh, this vaccine's going to work. Oh, well, maybe it'll work. Ha ha, it'll wear off. So it looks here like everybody's now starting to CYA because they know people are now going to investigate the whole entire public policy surrounding COVID. And they're all starting to cover their butts. And Ms. Walensky is just one. And we have to have these investigations. We have to have these hearings after November. This was the worst policy ever regarding health that this country has ever put forth. and we have to have the investigation. And as I said before, if people have to go to jail, so be it. All right, let's take a look at the Supreme Court. Okay, it says here the Supreme Court rejects New York school workers' attempt to block a vaccine mandate. It says here the Supreme Court has turned down a bid by New York City school employees who sought to block the city from firing them for not complying with a COVID-19 vaccine mandate. A majority of justices denied the request, which had been referred to the full court by Justice Neil Gorsuch, a Trump nominee. As is typical in such cases, the composition of the votes wasn't released. It says here, the city's Department of Education 2021 ordered all employees to get a COVID-19 vaccine, which limited exceptions on medical or religious grounds. 15 workers sued the department, alleging they were wrongfully suspended instead of being granted religious exemptions. The way the exemption applications were handled, the suit said, violated the U.S. Constitution. The workers asked the nation's top court to step in and issue a preliminary injunction while a circuit court panel weighs whether to overrule an earlier decision on the application. The panel on March 3rd rejected attempts to overturn the decisions. A lawyer for the plaintiffs told the Supreme Court on March 3rd. Now, essentially what happened, it's still being adjudicated in the lower courts. And what these employees did, they try to jump that and just go right to the Supreme Court and ask them to make the determination without adjudication going through the lower courts. And the Supreme Court said, well, no, we're not going to take it. We're going to let the lower courts decide this first. So it's not a complete bad thing. So we shall see. This may be revisited. Let's hope so. Okay, let's go to the markets. And again, the markets were dominated by Russia and oil. So with that said, the Dow was down 2.37% to 32,817.38. Year to date, the Dow is down 9.69%. The S&P was down 2.95% today to 4,201.09. Year to date, the S&P is down 11.86. The Nasdaq was down 3.62% to 12,830.96. Year to date, Nasdaq is down 17.99%. The 10-year bond was up 1.8 basis points to 1.767%. Oil, WTI, is at $120.9 per barrel. Gold was up 1.5% to $1,997.91. Silver was unchanged at $25.62. Bitcoin stands at $38,257.43. Ethereum stands at $2,519.02. And XRP stands at 72 cents. Let's look at some earnings. On Tuesday, March 8th, we have Oracle, Dick's Sporting Goods, Vienna Insurance, and Civitas Resources. On March 9th, we have CrowdStrike, Adidas, Prudential PLC, Campbell Soup, and Deutsche Post AG. Then on Thursday, March 10th, we have AIA Group, JD.com, Rivian, Wheaton Precious Metals. Then on Friday, the 11th, we have WeWorks, Swire Properties, Standard Bank Group, and Futu Holdings. And now let's take a look at the economic calendar. Okay, on Tuesday, we have the foreign trade deficit, and we have wholesale inventories. Then on Wednesday, March 9th, we have job openings and job quits. Then on Thursday, we have initial jobless claims, continuing jobless claims, consumer price index, core CPI, CPI year over year, core CPI year over year, real household wealth, and the federal budget deficit. Then on Friday, we have the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index and the 5-year inflation expectations. Okay, with that said, I want to thank everybody for listening. And remember, everything always works out. It may be a crazy time right now, but everything always works out. And we're Americans, and we have never seen anything we can't overcome. All right, again, so thank you very much, and you have a good week, and I will see you on Saturday.